Hello. Thank you for making it back. If you've made it through both chapter 20 videos, I know they were about 30 minutes long each or right at 30 minutes each. The problem is there's a lot of material to cover. So there's just no way around it. A one-page summary of chapter 20 is just not possible. Uh, so I don't want you to go away with just a little bit of learning. We're going to jump right back into chapter 20, and we're studying the 10 words or commandments. And these are vital to every person who loves God, who trusts Jesus. I think they apply to everybody. But I'm also challenging you to make that decision yourself with God, not your pastor, not your church, not your other people, but go to God with that one. Ask Him what He wants you to do. So we're going to jump back into Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. And if you're just joining us, you really got to go back to the first two videos on chapter 20 for these to make much sense. And that's just the way it goes. But verse 12, chapter 20 says this: honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Now let's read it in the complete Jewish version. It says, honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land which Adonai your God is giving you. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false evidence against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female slave, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So they basically say the same thing, word for word. There's a couple of different words, but for the most part, they're all the same. Now, the fifth word says children show respect and give care to their parents so that your days will be prolonged. And God really showed me this one about a year ago in June of 2023, whenever my dad had a stroke. And they lived in North Texas. I moved them down to where we live, and we've been taking care of them ever since. And it's been an absolute blessing to do it. Cost me a lot to do it, not money, but other things. But it's been worth it because God really showed me to protect their coming and going. In the original Hebrew, that's what it says. So let's kind of dig into that a little bit. He's saying that you will receive a blessing of a longer life and a more abundant life on earth by treating our parents with love and respect. Part of the reason is the importance of family in the Lord's plan. That's really, really important. The violation of this command brings family destruction and national destruction. So in the original Hebrew, it says in their coming and going, basically getting in and out of the house. Are you giving them dignity? Or are they having to crawl or struggle? You know, both my parents walk a little slower. They move a little slower, but it was important to preserve that dignity as much as possible, to provide them a place where they could be safe and secure and not worry about things. And for the most part, I think we've done a pretty good job. They watch these. Hi, mom and dad. I love them to death. It's been an incredible year to get to do all of this. It didn't cost me a lot in reality. It showed me who some people were that really didn't love me and really didn't want me. And that's okay. I'm not complaining about any of that. It's been the best thing that could have ever happened to me, I'm sure. But I also know there are people out there whose parents have been horrible. And maybe you can't talk to your parents, or you can't, for whatever reason, being in a relationship with them. And that's understandable. There's people in my life the same way. But your parents should at least be loved and respected and held high. Do you have to spend every minute with them? No. Maybe you might not even be able to talk to them depending on your situation. But in your heart, if you harbor some anger or malice towards them, let that go, because that's hurting you. That's going to not prolong your days. And God wants you to do that. So honor your mother and father by your actions and your deeds. Maybe the best way for you to do it is to not attack them, to not say anything disparaging about them. Start there and then search God for the rest. Ask him what he wants you to do in your particular situation. I have an amazing set of parents that I love getting to take care of and do things for. I get to go to Whataburger with my dad all the time, and I never got to do that before. I probably could have, but we weren't close enough in distance to do that very often. Now we get to do it all the time, and it's been a huge blessing to me as a father and as a son. I get to show that to my kids and my grandkids, that that's what's important. So it's been a real blessing. Okay, Exodus chapter 13, or chapter 20, verse 13 says it's against killing human beings. And this is one of those I get questions about sometimes, but it's not about general killing. In Hebrew, the word is ratzak, Ratsach, Ratsak. I think Ratsak is the way you pronounce it. I may be doing that wrong, but it refers to the unjust killing, whether intentional or unintentional. If it wasn't just, then it's against God's law. Jehovah explains in chapter 21, and we'll get there, only he has the right to take human life. The Torah gives the government the task of determining the guilt, and he delegates the task of exacting the blood penalty. The Bible also gives no one freedom to commute a murderer's death sentence. We don't have that power, but we do it all the time. The Jews decided that mercy was better and commuted death sentences. It just felt better to not kill people, even though God said you were supposed to do it. This is what we've done in the U.S. Bloodshed has not decreased. Murder hadn't gone down. It's just increased. But the Lord's principle is to take the life of a murderer, is to protect innocent life. Because there's one thing no one can argue with. Once somebody has been killed, they will not murder again. There's no chance of it again. That's why God came up with that. Well, I say that's why, to me, the reasonable explanation is God didn't want it to continue. So if you take someone's life for taking someone's life, it won't continue. So the seventh word says, don't commit adultery. Marriage plays a role in God's relationship with man. The union God is talking about is a spiritual union. The physical aspects of marriage exist for growing the human race. But that will end. We won't need to have babies and all of that whenever we are in heaven. The sin of adultery is less about physical things outside the marriage than it is about our spirits entering into unauthorized union with someone else. The only other union allowed within a marriage is with God. So when we watch pornography, or we have private conversations with somebody, or we start maybe a emotional or mental relationship with somebody else, we come into union with something that God didn't tell us to come into union with. That is what he means by adultery. So earthly marriage is a man and a woman coming into union with each other. Salvation is our being in union with Christ. So there's going to be a marriage feast in which Christ's bride, all believers, will enter into a marriage with him. This tells us that we are in union with Christ, but we are not fully into a marriage-like union with him. So how can we be kind of married to Yeshua? Am I making any sense? I got it, I promise. Just as we have an engagement before the actual wedding, back then, betrothal carried essentially the same weight of a marriage. So it was far more serious, though. It was a commitment almost as high as marriage. Now we'll break up an engagement and move on and consider that a good thing. All that remained, though, basically after the betrothal was the consummation. And that didn't happen until after the wedding. So really nothing big changed other than the consummation. Not that that's not big, but right now we're in a state of betrothal to Christ. We're in the marriage process. Christ is with us in spirit, but among the marriage, after the marriage feast, he will be with us, and we will be in union with him in person, of some sort of person. So for us to be unfaithful to Christ puts us in a state of adultery, and in Jehovah's eyes and God's eyes, we're cheating on Christ whenever we are unfaithful to him. especially about the things that he was very clear about, that, there's not a gray area in. So when the Hebrews spoke of adultery, they meant faithlessness to your union partner. It did not have to be sex. And I think in America, to some extent, we'd say, well, I didn't have sex with them. But you can enter into an emotional relationship with somebody that's not appropriate, or at least not honoring your marriage. That's a problem. If you have friends of the opposite sex that your spouse doesn't know about, that's not good. Add them in. Make sure their spouse and your spouse are fully aware of the conversation that's going on. Otherwise, potentially, there could be some major problems. So during the time of the patriarchs, no proof other than a husband's suspicions were needed, so he could just put her to death. The law of Moses brought the requirement of 2 witnesses. So by the time of Christ, a public humiliation was the penalty. And not long after Christ, the death penalty was removed completely. And that was man changed God's rule because we just didn't like it. We thought it was too hard. It was too harsh. It was not good. We judged God and we found he was wrong. That's why we did it. We may not know that's why we did it, but that's exactly why we did it. Paul provides us some guidelines. Some is from Christ, the rest is his opinion. The context of Paul's statement is about how it is better to not be married and to stay single, because if you're unable to remain celibate, then maybe you should get married. But married people may be unable to remain faithful and get along, so maybe they should stay single. When we fail, it affects our relationship with Jehovah, which is what Paul is so concerned about. We should see the grace in all of this. Don't think that if you're divorced and remarried that you're in an unauthorized union. If you have sought God's forgiveness and all that led to it, all of it, even the bad parts, even the parts that nobody else knows but you and God, because God knows them, then accept his forgiveness and move on. And move forward with gratitude that he gave you that forgiveness. This is why we need Christ. I've done that. I'm remarried. Renee and I have laid it all out there on the table, and we've asked for forgiveness, and we've repented from the things that we did wrong and the things that maybe we saw in a different way. And I fully believe that we have been forgiven and we've accepted that forgiveness. I can't give that to you. That comes from God. You need to seek that out, and I pray that you will. But please don't hear what I just said to sound like I'm condemning you or God's condemning you. God's asking you to come to him and talk about it. And that's what I'm telling you to do too. So Exodus 20:15 says exactly what means what it says. Obtaining something by deception is wrong. Even if it's technically legal, it's stealing. If you and God knows whether you did it by deception. So 16 is, this speaks to saying something false against someone in court, not bearing false witness. The context is the same thing as perjury. When we gossip or accuse someone that we have no firsthand knowledge of, we violate the principle of this 9th word. And we have a channel, and I don't want to pick on, well, I do want to pick on somebody, because there's a channel called the E Network or E Channel or something like that, and it's all about celebrity gossip. So it is in direct violation of this Exodus 20:16. We got a whole channel devoted to gossip and accusing people of stuff that we don't have any firsthand knowledge of. I don't think we should do that kind of stuff. 17 is to covet means to want something really bad, that you'd do just about anything to get it. And that starts in our mind. But specifically what he's talking about in tribal cultures, the typical way someone gained things is by taking what belonged to somebody else. And it's still true today. It's why we had so much trouble in Iraq, because it's all a tribal society. That's how they do things. I can go to my neighbor and buy his car. In a tribal society, you just go take his car and then, defeat his family or steal his whole family and everything. But usually from another tribe, you didn't steal from your own tribe, but kidnapping wives and children and slaves was pretty common and still occurs a lot in Africa and Asia and some of the tribal cultures there. But during their 40 years, there would have been a lot of time to just sit around and think, and what else could they want other than their neighbor's stuff? They didn't have stores and shopping centers, so you're staring at your neighbor's stuff going, I want it, I'm going to go take it. And God knew this because it was built into their culture. That's just the way they lived. So that is the 10 words or 10 principles God will base all the commands on. So this is the preparation for what's about to come. You're like, it gets worse? It doesn't get worse, but it does get a little bit more complicated as we kind of move along. So in some Bibles have verses 15 through 23. Yours may be 18 through 26. It's just a numbering thing. It's not that big a deal. But basically, the people asked Moses to speak to God for them. Moses told the people not to be afraid, that there were 3 reasons Jehovah had come to put Israel on trial. The Lord is teaching his way of justice, both how to live it and how to administer it. He's creating all of that. The second reason is people should have an awe of God, not dread. He doesn't want you to dread him. He wants you to have an awe, an appreciation for how big he is. And third, for Hebrews to learn not to sin. That's why he's doing it. That the people he sets apart do not offend or transgress against him, because that's sin. That's what sin is. I've heard the term of, what's sin for me may not be sin for you. I don't care what's sin for you. What God says is sin is what's sin. What I think of sin is not important either. It's what he says is sin. That's the only definition of sin. So Jehovah addressed other gods and making images. Jehovah will determine where altars to him are to be built and how. Wherever God decides an altar is placed in conjunction with proper sacrifice, he makes all those rules. God will bless his people, but only there, not just any place people choose. So Jehovah says, pile up some dirt. He also gives permission to use stone, but they must not use a tool on it, because to make it better than it occurs naturally, as better than God made it, is to profane that altar. So if there was an instruction that has been ignored by Hebrew and Christians alike, it's this one. We build cathedrals, churches, these massive synagogues for Jehovah, and we decorate them up and we make them just look perfect, and we tell people you can't do this inside there, no gum, no drinks, no whatever, and we just keep them pristine and perfect. But God says that he doesn't want any of that. He specifically says he doesn't want any of that. God no longer wants temples of stone and wood. We are his temple. So why are we doing that? He wants the dust of the ground from which we were created as the place where his spirit lives. I think Jehovah would rather we serve him with our obedience than with massive structures. And I've had people push back. I know there's some beautiful cathedrals. I've seen some. I love some of them that I've seen. But I think when we say we did it for God, we're not being honest. We did it for us. We did it to have something beautiful that we can say we did for God. But when we read Exodus chapter 20, especially at the end, where it says, and the Lord said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, you saw for yourselves that I spoke to you from heaven. Remember, you must not make any idols of silver or gold to rival me. Build for me an altar made of earth and offer your sacrifice to me, your burnt offerings and peace offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Build my offer wherever I cause my name to be remembered, and I will come to you and bless you. If you use stones to alter my altar, use only natural, uncut stones. Do not shape the stones with the tool, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. Do not approach my altar by going up steps. If you do, someone might look up under your clothing and see your nakedness. They used to wear robes in some of the pagan temples, and specifically not wear anything underneath, because a lot of it centered around sex and the body and all that kind of stuff. But when we read it in the complete Jewish version, it says this. Adonai said to Moshe, here's what you are to say to the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen that I spoke with you from heaven. You are not to make with me gods of silver, nor are you to make gods of gold for yourselves. For me, you need to make only an altar on earth. On it you will sacrifice your burnt offerings, peace offerings, sheep, goat, and cattle, and every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. If you do make me an altar of stone, you are not to build it out of cut stones. For if you use a tool on it, you profane it. Likewise, you are not to use steps to go up to my altar, so you won't be indecently uncovered. And some scholars believe some of that might mean too, if you have steps, then it will make you seem bigger and put the focus on you. Now, I know churches have steps. I'm definitely not saying rip out the stages and all of that kind of stuff. I'm just saying we need to look through the lens of the Torah at what we do now, rather than look at what we do now and see if it fits or get it to fit. That's not the way to do it. We should start with God and then finish with wherever we're at. Not start with us and then end with God. We don't need to shape God into what we want. That's called idolatry, and it's not permitted by God. It's very clear. Now, that's the 10 Commandments, 10 words, the Decalogue, however you want to look at it. I hope you've enjoyed this. I know it's been long, but I promise you, you will get blessings out of it. He says you will get blessings out of it. So pray, ask God to show you which way you need to go. God bless. Love God, love people, and change the world.